AM 1380, The Biz, the Wall Street Business Network.
Are you one of the 9 million Floridians living in a community managed by a property manager or HOA? If you've ever wondered what your rights are as a resident or what your role is as a volunteer board member, you've come to the right place. Welcome to the Condo Coaches, your resource for when your gated community starts to feel more like you're stuck behind bars, or when that guy next door decides that a hot pink Chevy on cinder blocks really sets the tone for the neighborhood. The Condo Coaches is brought to you by lmfunding.com. Find the Condo Coaches online at thecondocoaches.com. And now your host, Johnny Torres.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for listening, watching the Condo Coaches, coming to you weekly with a lot of great information, expertise, knowledge, experience. For those of you who may be living under a homeowners or community association, or those of you who may be serving as a board member on a community or homeowners association, as I like to say, we come here every week and we share our expertise as we volunteer here, as you do in your community, to help run your community effectively, efficiently, and on budget. Joining me every week, head coach Dean Akers. How are you?
Johnny, doing good. It was a pretty active week, too, with the past couple of weeks of guests related to the hurricane.
Yep.
So we had some calls and stuff and helped some people out with some questions on their properties from the hurricane damage.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's going to be the case, I would say, maybe even for the next couple months. We're going to see as people start to, again, put the pieces back together. Those of us in Central Florida, those of us in Tampa Bay, for the most part, I think, are pretty much almost at normal. But there are still people throughout the state that had varying effects on their homes, on their property, and their communities because of the hurricane. And so, speaking of which, a friend of mine, even just as close as Sarasota, had a tree fall in their home. And so, the guy even took a selfie on his roof with his insurance adjuster. And so right away, I sent him a message on Facebook. I was like, hey, great to see you working with an insurance adjuster, but you might want to reach out to a public adjuster as well, especially after talking to our friend from last episode.
And one thing I found, I had a couple questions. One thing people are finding out now is this deductible. Yeah. And you see 1% deductible, 2% deductibles, and you go, wow, that's just 1% of whatever, no big deal. The deductible is based off replacement value of the building. So if you have a 1% deductible of a $10 million building, you have a big deductible for anything, and people aren't realizing it. So you can buy down your deductibles, and we'll be having a show soon on that. Well,
I'm in the process of moving. And along with that, I'm also making changes to my car insurance policy and stuff like that. And now, having done this show for almost a year, I've learned a lot that even indirectly applies to some of the things I'm dealing with. And like you just said, I don't react to the deductible the way that I used to. It used to be, oh, yeah, go ahead and I'll get a high deductible, keep myself on a low monthly payment until you have to pay that deductible. Right, exactly. And then you realize, wow, like I really maybe should have just paid for that insurance up front, because now a lot of people are, like you said, are in that position where they're having to fork out a lot of money to cover that deductible. And I know you mentioned a while back, if you want to maybe reiterate that, I know through our Condo Coaches Network, we do have some financial assistance available to communities out there who may be in that situation where they have recovery fees or maybe high deductibles, and they're in a financial situation where they may not be able to cover those things.
Yeah, we're still doing a lot of financial analysis, and we really recommend boards to send their finances in and let us do a kind of a deep dive on them. It's different than having a CPA look at them. It's even different than a property manager looking at them. And we continue to find stuff in these financials that are kind of gotcha moments for the boards.
Okay. Well, and I want to dive into our inbox like we usually do. But you said you are hearing from some of these communities that are dealing with these issues. What are some of the other things, stemming from the hurricane that we're getting questions on?
Most of them we've covered as far as deductibles, cleaning up the property, the trees and tree damage and arborists.
Right.
I'm going to get one of our landscape coaches on the next couple of weeks to talk about, make sure you're doing this. If you've had trees down there, that you're setting them back, and we'll get one of those people. But I did have an interesting call from an individual who was just livid with his board. And it goes back to the book we're getting ready to publish right now,
Yep.
Communication. And he was livid and had called the DPR because his board was making all the board meetings secret board meetings.
Oh, boy.
Using the pretense of having legal stuff to talk about.
Well, and you can only use that excuse for so long, before people start to, think that you're up to something. And, I mean, you obviously hope that's not the case, but, it's consistent with what we hear almost weekly from people out there. They're unhappy with their boards. And as we often find, it's typically due to a lack of communication or some intentional maneuvering that upsets the people in the community instead of what you always preach, which is full transparency.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the conversing about this, and he was calling the DPPR, and I was explaining they're not going to do anything with this because it's not really in their venue with the issues. He's sending me all the letters they sent him, so I'll be looking at those.
Okay.
But his big angst comes down to an amenity, a pretty important amenity to him, which is a cage for hitting golf balls. And he went in there to hit baseballs, and everybody, got mad and said, you're not supposed to hit baseballs. This is for golf balls. And he went through the logistics of proving that the velocity of a baseball is minimal and the impact. It's one of these things. So now the board's basically cut him off. Yeah. And he's asking for records. They're not doing their record requests right. And if you don't do it within 10 days, you can be fined per day. Well, it's a train wreck, and it's nothing more than communication.
And not to get into that whole issue, but the truth of the matter is that just because a boat can float in a pool doesn't mean that it's okay for you to put a boat in the pool.
Correct.
I mean, and so if it's designed for golf, just keep it for golf and go find a batting cage somewhere.
Yeah, it's a contentious situation where both people have gone underground, and I told him I was pretty blunt. I said, you just need to chill out, and you just need to kind of respect everybody's thoughts.
Well, and that goes back to, again, we don't take sides here.
No.
We don't side with the board. We don't side with the residents. We side with what is right and what is the fiduciary responsibility to the community. Because in reality, again, the reason we do this show is for what's in the best interest of the community that you're living in. And so sometimes you may be in the right, sometimes you may be in the wrong, and we're certainly going to call it as we see it.
Well, the facts are, these are the facts he told me, was it's a golf cage for golfers. That's a fact.
Sure.
And I said, well, if it's a golf cage for golfers.
That's it, right?
Yeah.
So, he's answered his own question.
Yeah.
I mean, he's resolved his own problem, essentially. It's just not the answer he wants to hear.
Correct. And so now they've taken it down. So now his question is if they destroyed an amenity that he bought in the play. It's just
boy. Well, kind of in a similar light, but but again, just in contentious situations here with boards and residents. Want to thank Judith Meadows, who writes to us from Davie. She wrote to us last week saying, "Hey, can you help? We have a condo with inept management and a disinterested board." That, of course, is a recipe for disaster. I've seen in other organizations where even if you have good leadership, if the rest of the board is disinterested, not doing the things they should be doing, at some point that leadership also becomes disinterested and just gives up. What can they do in this situation? I mean, if they're not on the board?
Well, a couple things. And by the way, we're going to be in South Florida at the L&L expositions the next couple weeks in Miami, Lauderdale, doing a couple things, and we're doing a program on this communication.
Awesome.
The biggest thing is that's their assumption they're disinterested. They need to find out what the issue is. If they're saying they're disinterested, great. What's your issue? And then you go back to the facts and what the facts mean. If they say, well, they're disinterested, and you go, okay, so what's wrong? They go, nothing. Then who cares?
Yeah. I mean, again, they only have the requirement to meet once a year, and that's for an annual board meeting, right?
Right.
So if they're meeting at least once a year, they're doing what they're supposed to.
Well, and if there's no issue. Now, if she's saying there's an issue that they've shut the electricity off, there's no water, and nobody's responding, then you got a problem.
Sure.
But I'm trying to get people to get out of the gray area of saying it's a bunch of stuff. Okay, what's a bunch? It's all this gray stuff. Disinterested. What does disinterested mean?
Yeah. Well, and a note to anyone who does reach out to us, because we love getting your emails, your phone calls, your Facebook messages, which this one came through Facebook. Give us context. Give us as much detail as possible, even if it seems like you're writing us a book. It's certainly better than us not having the adequate or the necessary information to really make a call on this. Obviously, the Condo Coaches will contact you and go through all that anyways. But if it's something you'd like for us to discuss on the show, we need that context to really make a good judgment and pass that education along to someone who may be dealing with the same thing. Again, inept management and a disinterested board is something we actually hear quite often.
Yes.
And so while certainly appreciate Judith reaching out, and we're going to dig a little deeper into this. For the sake of the show, again, we're very easy to get a hold of. There's 3 ways to get a hold of us. Our website, thecondocoaches.com. That's thecondocoaches.com. Of course, you got social media, so really it's 4 ways. So you can reach out to us on any of our social media platforms. And then the other way is email. We love our email. You can send it to us at help@thecondocoaches.com, help@thecondocoaches.com, and then we pass that email on to the appropriate condo coach to help you with your issue. And last but not least, Dean loves voicemail. You can call us, leave us a message. We'll get back to you. Our phone number, 813-331-5415, 813-331-5415. And again, we're more than happy to bring up your question on the show, which then you can pass along to all your fellow residents and board members. But at the very least, you're going to hear from one of our condo coaches who are going to help you through the issue.
Right. And we're going to ask, what does inept mean and what does incompetent mean? I mean, you got to define it. Does it mean they show up late for work?
Yeah.
Whatever. Try to define that for yourself first, and then make sure you can define it with us.
Well, and again, we're the second opinion or the unbiased opinion in the equation there. And so us being out of that whole situation really allows us to give you a perspective that you're probably not going to get from anyone in the community.
You're right.
All right, segment 2 coming up, and our guest, who I forgot to introduce, but Ryan Duran's here. He's our collections coach. We're going to talk collections and association fees in the next segment, coming up right after this.
Contact the Condo Coaches online at thecondocoaches.com. More of the Condo Coaches is coming up next.
It only takes a minute to find out if you may have prediabetes, and you can do it at doihaveprediabetes.org. But you're probably not going to. Nope. I'm sure you've got a perfectly good excuse. Kids, work. I get it. You're busy. So what better time than now? Let's begin. Raise one finger if you're a man. Ladies, none yet. Oh, count in your head if you're driving. Now, 3 more fingers for everyone over 60, 2 over 50, 1 over 40, 1 more if you're not physically active, another finger if anyone in your family has type 2 diabetes. Another if you've got high blood pressure. If you're overweight, raise another finger. 2 if you're very overweight. And 3 if you're really overweight. You've just taken the world's first audio prediabetes test. And if you're holding up 5 or more fingers, visit doihaveprediabetes.org or talk to your doctor. There's no excuse because prediabetes can be reversed.
Brought to you by the Ad Council and its pre-diabetes awareness partners.
Welcome back to the Condo Coaches, online at thecondocoaches.com. Here's your host, Johnny Torres.
And joining me today on the Condo Coaches, as always, head coach Dean Akers and our guest collections coach Ryan Duran. How you doing, Ryan?
Doing great, thanks.
Yeah, well, it's nice, I would say, that we're kind of changing direction a little bit. We've been talking a lot about the hurricane and everything that comes along with that. It's one of those things where obviously that type of information is necessary.
Sure.
But man, it's just a strain and the stress and and sometimes you just need a timeout, and take
Absolutely.
a little break. And so really at the end of the day, what we see most often, and we talk about it constantly. I would say we probably have someone that's somewhere in the neighborhood of this topic, probably once a month, or or every month and a half or so. But we can't stress enough, obviously, the importance of collecting your association fees. We have the playbooks, which we'll talk about later on in the segment. which we have 2 booklets really that address
Great
collecting
resources,
association
great
fees. So we're really glad to have you on today, and we're going to dig into that. We just have one more juicy email that came in, and I was going to hold off on it, but it's just too good. It's too good, and it goes to show you there's never a dull moment in the homeowner association industry. So this person who writes to us is Carl. Looks like it's from the Orlando area. Says he's a former member of his HOA, and he's concerned that 3 of the 5 board members up and quit, leaving only 2 members behind. Turns out the 2 members who are left behind are husband and wife. So now that it's just the husband and wife on this board, this is a subdivision, about 129 homes. They are now, according to Carl, running the HOA like they own it. And so is there a way to kind of get this back, where there's some checks and balances to this equation? Apparently they want to do all kinds of modifications and improvements and things that, not everybody seems to be on board with. One of them is adding like 5 feet to the subdivision wall at a cost of like $80,000. The big conflict of interest here is that they own about 5 or 6 homes in this community. So huge conflict of interest, huge red flag there. What do you think, Dean?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but each unit is entitled to have a voter.
Mm-hmm.
So if they own 2 units, but the first thing I was going to say is if they just had a home there, they have 1 vote, 1 position.
Yeah.
But they clearly can be up dual on the board. They can't make amenity changes. They can't change the amenity without a vote of the majority vote of the members of the HOA.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things there. We've seen, again, not being a lawyer, just being a coach, but we've seen with boards go down to 2. If they stay there very long, the state appoints a receiver. And then the whole program gets really interesting because the state of Florida requires 3 members to the board.
Well, that brings everything to a screeching halt. But for Carl, that may be the loophole he's looking for, the opportunity, the window he's looking for to maybe kind of hit the brakes on this. Because if they are only 2 board members, he could get the DBPR involved. In fact, they're having a board meeting tonight. And so he's trying to move on this quickly. I don't know if he's going to be able to kind of get the pieces in place to do something about it for tonight. But again, while the husband and wife serving on the board, I don't think is the major issue. I think the big conflict here is, again, the fact that they own 5 or 6 homes and they sit on the board and they're looking to make big decisions about how the money is spent.
Well, again, not being an attorney, but being kind of a real practical coach.
Yeah.
I think he said they had 3 people quit.
Correct.
It was, right, yeah.
Yeah, so they have a 5-member board. They're not doing anything.
Yeah, you can't get anything done with the 2.
Because you don't have a quorum.
Correct.
So
Right.
they can sit there and have
Sure.
coffee and everybody drink punch at the clubhouse, but there's no legislation or whatever you would like to call it that can come out of that quote board meeting because a quorum can't be established.
So let's say they try to have this meeting and they try to push something through. It's all void.
Oh yeah,
It's all
It's a waste of
invalid.
time.
It's right. Okay.
a board meeting tonight with 2 people out of a 5-person board won't meet quorum.
Yeah.
The first thing that should happen in the board meeting is the president should call it to order and say, ask the secretary, do we have quorum? And the secretary, maybe his wife goes, well, there's 2 of us.
No.
And
you're
the
done.
answer's no.
Yeah.
Everybody have a good day. There's coffee over there, and I brought some donuts.
All right. So good luck to Carl, and we're absolutely going to be in touch with him.
Yeah,
and,
Carl, we definitely want to keep. If he needs us to coach the
Yeah.
president and stuff, we'd be happy to help.
Well, again, fortunate for him, I think, is the fact that 3 of the 5 board members resigned, basically kind of putting a stop, even unknowingly, to whatever this couple might be trying to do.
I will tell you this, Johnny. When I hear these things, it's like my call the other day.
Mhm.
There's usually things we don't know.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't
Always.
it's just not 3 just went.
Oh, yeah. No, always. I mean, we're always getting one side of the story. We're never getting all the details. But based on what Carl sent in,
Right.
I mean, it still doesn't sound like a very good situation there.
Well, he doesn't have to worry about any board votes.
That's true.
Yeah, the
That's true.
concern shouldn't be a real one. So
Yeah.
So Ryan Duran joins us, collections coach. Let's kind of shift this, and I know, we kind of said we were getting away from the hurricane stuff, but I think it's important to really tie it into what's happening right now, because I can assure you that there are boards out there who are scratching their heads and wondering, how do they handle the finances of a community that may be going through some serious recovery efforts right now? How do they make sure that not only do they have the funds to get through this recovery, but also, do adjustments need to be made? And so based on your experience, what is probably the best way to handle the collections of association fees and people that, again, may have unforeseen expenses that may fall behind? What are you kind of feeling and hearing, especially following this really bad hurricane situation we have?
The big thing is, and I know it's been talked about on the show before, is having a collection policy in place, having a one way that you handle those things. Now you throw a hurricane in there. That's a curveball. And we're still dealing with human beings here. So although ideally you have a one policy forever, this may be one where you need to deviate a little bit. Now what that means, I'm not sure. That would be up for each association to decide.
Yep.
But for example, I'm sure people that have mortgages realize that some of the mortgage companies are giving you a little slack on paying, or did over the last month or so. Now, not saying stop collecting, but it depends on where you're at and how your community was affected by the storm.
Yeah. And so, because you're exactly right. I mean, not only are these a lot of unforeseen expenses for a community, but even for some of the individual homeowners,
Sure.
Whether you're in a condo or a townhome or a single family home, there is expenses that went into either preparing for the hurricane or even post-hurricane that people weren't counting on. What would you see as acceptable? I mean, I'm assuming, Dean, in this kind of situation, this was something that they would probably have to have a board meeting about, or an emergency board meeting, and vote on this sort of thing if they are going to amend their collections policy in any way.
Well, I think Ryan's a collection expert. He's a consultant. That's what we brought him in. But when we were having lunch today, I was asking Ryan about collection policies, and he said, the sad thing, Dean? And I go, what? He goes, most associations actually didn't have one. They don't have one.
They don't have a collections policy at all.
Right. So it's just all loosey-goosey. And he was sharing with me about how by not having a collection policy and it being loosey-goosey, when it starts spiraling out of control,
Correct.
His words were, it's very much out of control.
Well, because the residents aren't being held to anything.
It's not a problem until it's so big of a problem that it should have never gotten there in the first place. And,
Sure.
and that's really what you're trying to stem from occurring.
Well, and it just compounds the issue,
Correct,
especially following, again, a natural disaster, regardless of the extent of the damage. Because when, we had, was it Scott? When we were talking about the trees falling over, or no, I'm sorry, it was our public adjuster. It was
right.
Nathan Shepard. So when Nathan was talking about how expensive it is to do tree removal and debris cleanup and all that stuff, I mean, again, even if it caused no damage to your community, you could still be looking at six, I'm saying maybe 4 or 5 figures in expenses that
Sure.
you
Adds
weren't
up.
counting on.
Absolutely. And the association needs that money. So I kind of went with the being a little lenient when if you need to, but at the end of the day, that association is counting on those dues, and they need them to do what they need to do, which is preserve the community.
Now, Zian, we did talk briefly about some of the financial assistance that we have available to us through the Condo Coaches, and if anyone's interested in that, email us through help@thecondocoaches.com. Again, help@thecondocoaches.com. But if someone wants to go a different route, and again, maybe they're a little cash strapped to deal with some of the things that they need to deal with. At that point, what are maybe some other suggestions? Do they do a special assessment? Do they go and maybe find a small loan that's given to the association that they can then repay in installments? What's kind of the best approach there? In terms of maybe finding some cash in an emergency situation?
Well, depending on how big it is, obviously a special assessment. But special assessments generally, unless it's a fairly wealthy organization, to get the money out of somebody that day is almost impossible. What we've been helping with lately is taking and creating a special assessment pool and going out and bridge financing it with the banks.
Oh, okay. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah,
there.
you're basically paying for it today, but it's like buying a car. Part of the special assessment's pledged back and goes every month to the bank.
Got it. Okay. Well, coming up, we're going to open the next segment talking about our playbooks and why that's incredibly relevant to our guest today. Joining head coach Dean Akers and myself is Ryan Duran. He is our collections coach. We're going to be talking association fees, collections, and why it is incredibly important that you are on point with your community's finances. It's the Condo Coaches radio show. Segment 3 coming up right after this.
Contact the Condo Coaches online at thecondocoaches.com. More of the Condo Coaches is coming up next.
Life is full of bittersweet transitions. It's difficult to know how these changes will impact us over time. For some people, difficult transitions like retirement, divorce, or loss of a loved one can hit harder than expected and may contribute to feelings of hopelessness or even thoughts of suicide. The risk of suicide is even higher for men over 50 who served our country. Guys like me. That's why support from friends and family makes such a big difference. Every day, your actions could help save a life. Together, we got this. Learn how you can help save a life at veteranscrisisline.net.
Welcome back to the Condo Coaches, online at thecondocoaches.com. Here's your host, Johnny Torres.
Don't forget you can podcast or subscribe to us on YouTube and catch every single episode of the Condo Coaches, even going back to episode 1. I'm so excited because that means I've been sitting here for almost a year with Dean Akers across from me.
I know.
And any Monday that involves Dean Akers is a good day.
Exactly.
So we're here sharing incredible information week after week, and if you've missed any of it, we have it all available for you there on YouTube. Just search the Condo Coaches and make sure you subscribe. If you prefer the audio version, maybe you have a long commute. Really, our show breaks down to about 50 minutes, so even if you have a 20, 25-minute commute, you can squeeze a whole episode into not only your commute into work, but back home, and you can subscribe to us on iTunes. I mean, really, you can't make it any easier than that. If you have an Android device, I apologize, but I'm just joking. I love my iPhone products, and but you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, again, all the great podcasting platforms out there. Just search for the Condo Coaches podcast. We're talking collections and collection policies, association fees. Before we go back to you, Ryan, on that, I do want to stress we talk about our playbooks all the time, to the extent that sometimes I feel like we talk about them too much, but it's just they're too good to pass up because they're free. And as they say, if it's free, it's for me.
Right.
And so there are 6 booklets. Number 7 just got the final approval, going to the printer today. And so that's all the more reason to come out and see you at one of the trade shows,
right,
because you'll have booklet number 7 to give away. But we've got 7 of these, and I'm only holding 2 of these up because these 2 right here are the ones that are most relevant to our conversation today, and that's understanding your community's finances and collecting delinquent association fees. Now, don't be fooled. This does have all the information you need, and it is a light read. Like, you can, one sitting right there, and you're going to get the information you need.
Good stuff.
That whether you're a board member or a resident, you're going to be much more informed as to the financial health of your community and the red flags you should be looking for, especially when it comes to delinquent association fees. We were talking briefly in between segments here, and now that we kind of got past a little bit of that educational knowledge for those people coming back and recovering from the hurricane, let's get into really, again, this being a consistent effort on behalf of the board and the property management company to ensure that everyone's pulling their weight. You mentioned earlier that most communities don't have a sound, consistent, or maybe even at all have a collections policy in place.
Correct. What we see is a majority of your management companies out there have some sort of, call it friendly notice process, where they send out a, hey, you're delinquent. We'd really appreciate if you could contact us or get up to speed, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. And they could have a series of 2 to 3 of those. The problem that I see a lot, or we see a lot, is that when you start talking to these boards and asking them what that process is, they go, well, we don't really know exactly. I think at when an account is delinquent, okay, what's the definition of delinquent? Is it 30 days, 60 days, 45, 90?
Yeah.
You'll get all the different answers. Okay, then what happens? Well, I think my management company may do X, Y, and Z. Again, they're not exactly sure because there's no firm policy in place of at day 45 we do this, at day 60 we do this, and at day 90 we do whatever it may be.
Right.
So it's getting that, call it pre-litigation or prior to even sending it to an attorney, locked in, and then going on beyond that.
Well, this is really where you want to rely on your property management company, right? They're the ones that have the expertise in the space, the experience in knowing what works, what doesn't work. And of course, they're going to give you all the options upon which you and the community can decide what's going to work best for you. But at the end of the day, you need to sit down with that property management company if you have one, or at the very least, maybe do a survey, which we've offered to do for communities at no cost, and find out what your residents may feel is reasonable in terms of a collections timeline, right?
Sure. We don't care what it is, just have one.
Sure.
You guys decide.
Okay. And typically, is it 30 days?
It's usually 45 days before something will go into effect. And again, it's usually at least one friendly letter, and then from there to whatever attorney the association chooses to use.
And so, I mean, how quickly, should someone start looking at getting a legal process in place? I mean, you have that. Obviously, you should have that as part of your collections policy. But let's say that 45, is it 90 days where you start to get the attorney involved? Or again, do you shoulder that responsibility on the property management company?
I'd say 90 max.
Okay.
Before you put it in the hands of an attorney. Prior to that, you can send the friendly things, but if you don't have at day 90, no matter what, it goes to XYZ law firm. You see associations go, well, it's my friend, and well, they're on hard times, and now you start making exceptions to the rule, and that's where you really run into trouble.
Well, and again, following something like Hurricane Irma, and of course all the weather situations we've been dealing with, regardless of where you are in the country, because there's been a lot going on, you can't make those exceptions, right? For one person and not everyone.
Correct.
Well, we had an attorney on one time that shared that's considered selective enforcement.
Right.
Which that your fiduciary responsibility is to treat everybody equally and fairly.
Well, and you're opening yourself up also to not only some legal consequences, but also I think it would cause a breakdown, right, in how that policy is perceived and upheld going forward, because they're like, okay, well, if you're going to bend the rules for this guy, then again, the expectation is that you're going to bend the rules for everybody.
You just don't want to do it. You want to stay away from that, absolutely.
Well, one thing I didn't realize when we were, again, I have lunch with the guests before we come on.
Yep.
But Ryan was sharing how many, from a consultative standpoint, how many collection events he's been involved with. And he's been involved with over 12,000 transactions. And I was really impressed with his knowledge he kind of teed it up, and he said, Dean, the biggest challenge is people keep putting it off. If they would just get a collection policy, put it on autopilot.
Yep.
And he mentioned the management companies. The management companies will advise them, but it requires the board to vote.
The board has to be in charge and involved and know what's going on. Ask the questions, and when you don't know the answers, go find them.
Well, and it's one of those things that it's probably one of the lesser enjoyable things about being a board member, but is having to be kind of not the bad guy in this situation, but really be the one that lays down the law and establish this policy. And so at that point, have you seen where maybe they poll the residents and kind of get their feedback in terms of what the full process should look like, or is it typically something that's just kind of kept within the board?
It could generally just be done with the board.
Yeah.
The board is comprised, or should be comprised, of good paying owners. So generally they're on board with putting together a firm policy, because if I pay, then everyone else should pay. And they get that policy in place and then actually enforce it.
Well, and you just made a note, which is that the board members are hopefully also good paying residents.
Yes.
Should that also be part of the collections policy? Because, I mean, be it that most boards are typically 3 to 5 people, but if any of them do fall delinquent on their association fees, there should be a policy in place as to whether or not they're able to keep their role on that board.
Well, that is a policy.
That is a policy.
State statute.
Yes.
90 days.
All right.
Now, if they're past 90 days, they're automatically
off the board.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right, good.
So that takes care of itself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's nice, right?
Yeah.
And Dean, we've talked oftentimes, of course, again, about leveraging the network that we've built here at the Condo Coaches. And so there's a few things that I know people can take advantage of. Why don't we go into, of course, the collections policy? You've talked about maybe having a boilerplate policy that we can share.
We do, and we'll provide any association that emails us. We'll give them a attorney-vetted collection policy. They still want to have their attorney, John Henriette, but it's a attorney-vetted collection policy that they can put in place. And I want to make a note. We broadcast out of Tampa Bay area, and I know a lot of Tampa Bay politicians, and the mayor and I of Tampa, great Bob Buckhorn does a great job. He and I know each other. I promise you, if I don't pay my property taxes, he doesn't stand up for me and said, Dean's good for it later on.
Right.
So he has a fiduciary responsibility, and so do these boards. That's why there's a policy. Bob Buckhorn doesn't just all of a sudden say, hey, we're going to get strict on this. That's a public policy.
Sure.
So in a board, they want to make a condominium much like a public policy. So if somebody comes up and gets angry, you go, that's the policy that's been in place for the last 5 years. We appreciate it. If you want me to help you by you and I go get a loan or whatever, they could do that, but the policy still maintains.
Well, it's a legacy policy as well, right? And so what people have to keep in mind if they are on the board is that you can't even consider what you're currently dealing with, but think about the fact that this is going to be in place long term, and it's for the longevity and overall health of the community long term. And
we devised something too, the Condo Coaches has, that we can email somebody if they request. We have a community impact. I showed it to Ryan a while back. We put in the total accounts receivable. Mm-hmm. We put the total head count for the people that are involved. Then we put the total rest of the residents, and it mathematically does it. And we had one association that it was $4,200 per paying member to support those that didn't pay. And when they got that back, when they got it back, you think everybody goes, well, I'm glad I paid $4,200 for the other guy that didn't pay. You think that's what they said?
No, of course not.
No, but they didn't know. So that's a free form. If they'll email us, we'll send it back to them or even help them work it out.
Well, and again, the paying residents don't realize that they're on the hook for the non-paying residents. And then down the road, they're wondering why there isn't money for certain services or maintenance or maybe features, amenities, upgrades, that sort of thing.
The money has to come from somewhere. Yeah. And like Dean hit on, that spreadsheet is very powerful, and he's used it with associations, and it makes them go, wow, that's coming out of my pocket.
I know it's a little premature, but following, again, a hurricane like Irma or any of these kind of natural disasters, do you see an uptick in delinquent association fees?
I think it's still too soon to really know the impact of what that's going to look like, but I think it's still too soon.
Yeah. And just based on what you're seeing, right? Because there is, I would say, maybe some parallel with the overall housing market. I mean, do you see right now, what's kind of the state of delinquent association fees and collections and all that? What do you see? Where's the trend right now?
It's a good question. We're actually seeing right around an average of 5 to 6% delinquency rate. Okay. And the interesting thing about that is 5 or 6%. It's not zero, but it's not 20 or 30%.
Sure.
And so the problem that we're seeing is boards kind of letting their foot off the gas and going, well, it's not really an issue.
Yeah.
It is an issue. Again, that money has to come from somewhere. This has been budgeted to run your community. So even if it's 5% or 6%, that's still a problem that you need to get ahead of before that becomes a bigger problem.
And we just found out from CAI that the average assessments per year, average budget $1.2 million. So 5% of that is $60,000 of real money.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so just math. It's not opinion.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about CAI because, and then obviously your trade show's coming up. But we are talking with Ryan Duran, collections, delinquent association fees, and more right here in the Condo Coaches radio show. Final segment coming up.
Contact the Condo Coaches online at thecondocoaches.com. More of the Condo Coaches is coming up next.
Attention men under the age of 35. You know what really impresses the ladies? When a guy has a few drinks and later gets pulled over for buzz driving. That could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. There goes let's grab dinner and a movie. Oh, I know. You drive more carefully when you're buzzed. You've proven that hundreds of times. A woman admires that kind of confidence. And you've practiced how to speak if a cop does pull you over. Slowly, clearly, and politely like, "Good evening, officer." A woman admires that kind of foresight. And what woman doesn't find it adorable that you call it buzzed even though the law calls it drunk? You could kiss $10,000 goodbye, along with any chance of having a girlfriend. Because nothing says, "I'm a catch," more than a guy who lives in his parents' basement and calls it my place.
Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Condo Coaches, online at thecondocoaches.com. Here's your host, Johnny Torres.
And again, you can catch us on demand at youtube.com. Just search the Condo Coaches, our website, thecondocoaches.com, where we also have some fantastic blogs there where you can learn a little bit more as well. And then, of course, our Facebook page where we stream live every Monday, typically around 1 o'clock, and we bring you the show live where you can send in questions, comments, feedback. Also a great way to get involved with the show. And so any of those ways are a great way to digest your Condo Coaches information. And, you know, we talk a lot about Florida, but by no means does that mean that we don't care about our fans that are across the country. We do hear from you. We love getting all your questions, and obviously we'll address it, again, within the confines of our knowledge as it pertains to what is within legal boundaries here in Florida. And neither of us are lawyers, but there are going to be laws, depending on where you live, that may change your particular situation. But the problems carry over, I mean, across the country. I mean, we've heard from people as far as Portland, Oregon, and the problems don't change.
Well, I just got my designation for CMCA. It's a designation with CAI, which is Community Association Institute.
Yep.
Well, the designation is equivalent to community area manager in Florida, which is a licensed position. And I liked it because when I went through the curriculum and took the test, Florida is all about the laws and stuff, but a lot of Florida is about the same thing as CMCA. That's why it's a prerequisite.
Okay.
So no matter where you go, the issue of communication and boards and stuff, forget the laws for a minute.
Yeah.
These things are everywhere.
It's universal.
It's universal. So it doesn't, the particular law might define a certain aspect, which we talk about.
Or consequences.
But it's a business. And a business is a business.
A business is a business.
So like you said, it's a $1.2 million business.
Oh, yeah. And so we see it. And so our listeners in California, we've had them from Nevada. We've had them from the Northeast.
Yeah.
All of them, these booklets are insanely good for them because they're international. They play with anybody.
Well, and again, we have Ryan Duran joining us. He's our collections coach. We are talking about community finances. And again, 2 of these booklets are key if you want to download them right now at thecondocoaches.com/playbook. thecondocoaches.com/playbook. Now, I'm only holding 2. The others are here on the desk. We will have number 7 as soon as Dean hits the road for the trade shows. You're going to be able to get a hard copy of that 7th booklet if you come out and see Dean at any of these trade shows. But these are not only incredibly valuable in terms of information, and they do apply anywhere in the country, but they're also absolutely free. All you got to do is go on there. You let us know you're a living, breathing human being by filling out a form, and then they come to your email. You don't even have to download them all because you get the individual links, and so you just pick the ones you choose. Or if you do want to download them all, you can go ahead and do that. And by all means, send them to your board members.
Wow.
Or even your residents, right?
They're good for anything. But
sure.
The book we just did, because I just approved the proof and we're getting it printed, is almost 50 pages. And it's the top 10 things residents need to know.
Well, right, and that's a spin-off of our first book, which is the top 10 most important things you need to know if you're a COA or an HOA board member. But this one's for the residents.
Yeah.
And I think it's our thickest book yet.
Oh, yeah, and it really talks to their side of the issue and helps them. So hopefully if somebody gets them all, we just totally impact communications.
It's like Pokemon. You got to get them all.
Exactly.
So Again, joining us, Ryan Duran, collections coach, and it's a topic we've discussed a number of times here on the show throughout over the past year, but we can't do it enough because we continue to get a lot of the questions, emails, phone calls about a community's finances, and for many people, it's the hardest part to really get a grasp on in terms of understanding how it is that they need to run their community from a fiscal standpoint.
Yeah, and Ryan was sharing something at lunch that was pretty interesting to me. He shared with me that these associations have unique rights to foreclose, and they have to process to lien and all these different things they have to do. And I was like, so you mean they have like super rights? And he goes, basically they have rights ahead of everybody but the banks. And it was really interesting because it means that you need to do things quickly. And there could be decision making that he told me you shouldn't do it now, you should do it then. Well, it gave me some great examples.
And whether or not it's going to be worthwhile to go down the legal road to collect on those, because again, the success rate, there's a lot of variables in there that will determine whether or not you have a successful collection.
Here's what's neat. We've learned that, and we've seen with people that have implemented these collection policies right off the bat, with your community knowing you have a firm policy in place, they mop up some of the issues right then. You don't have to have a collection attorney involved or any legal fees or anything. You simply put a firm policy in place, and now people know, okay, these guys mean business.
Well, up front, it discourages that type of behavior and lets them know that, hey, you're not playing around.
Correct.
So we talked about at around the 90-day mark getting an attorney involved to start the collections process if it goes beyond that, or if there's been a lack of communication on behalf of the resident. What are kind of, as Dean was saying, what are some of the rights and powers that an association has and may want to execute on if, again, this delinquency is prolonged?
Sure. Well, the collection policy is very simple. It's pursuant to Florida law. You have to send your 30-day notice of intent to lien in a condominium association. And a homeowner's, it's a 45-day demand, in which once that time lapses, you can file a lien on the property. Then you file a, again, 30-day or 45-day notice to foreclose. Now, once you get to that, call it 90-day mark, you can file a foreclosure. Now, prior to doing that, your attorney should be having a conversation with the association as to, do you want to take this next step? What does it mean?
And it moves quickly too. So those lines of communication need to be wide open.
It moves very quickly, and I challenge boards to ask questions to understand what they're doing. Simply
and
ask
the consequences
why.
On both sides too, right?
Sure.
Like, what kind of position does put the board in? What effect is this going to have on the homeowner?
Sure.
And the overall community. Let's say
you file and complete a foreclosure action as an association. You could very well end up owning a property.
Yeah.
We've seen all too many associations where the boards have the attorney has completed their foreclosure process, flipped the association a deed to the unit, and said, "Here you go. Now you're the proud owner of this unit or this home."
Yep.
And they go, "What happened? How did I get here? Now what do I do?"
Now they have
That's
additional
not my problem.
responsibility.
That's your problem. Yeah. So ask the questions ahead of time. Know what you're doing.
But wouldn't you say, with all the collection consultants across the state of Florida that are non-attorneys, they're more business people that look at the sides of it, which is what you do, is get a consultant involved that can kind of advise, not legally, but advise kind of the routes and what the implications are. Because I've seen a lot of the legal field, which they do a great job. The board says, we want to foreclose. And they go, okay.
Yes, they're following the legal process. They're not there to give you, and generally, they're not there to give you financial advice. So we look at it from a financial perspective.
The attorney's going to do whatever. Yeah, the attorney and the property management company are going to do whatever you tell them to.
It's legally, can I do X, Y, or Z? And they'll tell you legally yes or no, but they're not going to. They're generally not going to give you a financial analysis.
Well, and like you said, if you're going to call for a foreclosure on a property and the community takes over that property, you need to understand now the additional responsibility that comes along with that.
Correct.
And I figure, like you said, oftentimes people are completely blindsided by the fact that now this community owns a property which is also now still not paying into the association fees because it's a vacant property.
Correct. So now they have the property. Generally, the next question I get is, can we sell it? Depends. Is there a mortgage on it? Is it not? Is it underwater? Generally, it is. So theoretically, yes, you can sell it, but the property may be worth $100,000 and it may have a $175,000 mortgage on it.
And 3 tax liens.
And taxes and everything else, second mortgages, whatever.
Because I was just say, typically, I mean, would you say that people who are behind on their mortgage payments are also the ones who end up being behind on their association fees?
They tend to go hand in hand.
And is it in that order? Do they typically fall behind on mortgage first and then association fees, or the other way around?
I think the other way around. I think they see the association as somebody that they're closer to me. I can get to them later, whereas the bank typically has a firm policy and they don't care who you are.
Or they may see it as a non-essential, right? So
exactly.
if their finances kind of fell apart and they start to try to look for ways to save money, I would see, okay, well, this association fee is non-essential really to the day-to-day, and they may cut that off before they stop paying their mortgage.
Sure. I'd be willing to bet that most people that have a mortgage take that seriously because, if you don't pay it, the bank's going to foreclose on you. You don't know who you're dealing with on the other side. Whereas the association, again, I know my friend on the board or whatever, so it goes back to that collection policy that you need to have in place.
Well, and on the resident side, I also think that most people don't realize that just as easily as the bank, that the association can foreclose on their property.
A lot of people don't really understand that as well.
Sure.
Correct.
And so explain to us again, maybe some of the effects. We got just about a minute here, but what's maybe the biggest issue with a community taking over a property?
What to do with it once you own it.
Okay.
Does your community have rental restrictions? Some can rent, some cannot. When you do rent, it goes back to the financial analysis. Most associations go, well, I can rent that for $1,000 a month times 12. That's $12,000 a year. Sure, but are you paying your self-assessments? You need to, so there goes $300 a month. Do you have a rental manager? You should. That's another 10% off the top. How much money do you have to put into rehab? Do you have to put appliances in? There's all these things that most people don't think of. They think of top line and top line only.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that easy.
All right. Well, if you have more questions on collections and delinquent association fees, Ryan, again, one of our condo coaches, feel free to reach out to us. help@thecondocoaches.com is our email address, thecondocoaches.com our website, or call us 813-331-5415. Say bye, Dean.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Condo Coaches, brought to you by lmfunding.com. Find us online at thecondocoaches.com and join us this same time next week as we help you navigate life in your managed community.